I'll just start
Okay,
the
go ahead.
um I don't see a list of people who are here at the, there it is. Okay, great. Um okay. All right.
Oh, Amanda is in the waiting room right now, and I just hit
Great.
admit all, so she should be here momentarily.
Great. Oh, there she is. Hi, Amanda. How are you? All right,
Uh,
so we'll begin this meeting. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being with us today at the Federal Nuclear Waste Policy Committee meeting of the Vermont Yankee NDCAP. My name is Lissa Weinman. I am the chair of this committee. And if possible, I'd like other committee members to just sort of introduce themselves very quickly by name. Other committee members, could you do that, starting with Maddie?
Madeline Arms, Town of Vernon.
And Marvin?
Marvin Resnikoff, appointed by New Hampshire governor.
And we have Dave Eastman.
I don't see him here on the list. We have one person who is trying to join, and apparently something is locked up on their end.
Okay, it's probably him. And do we have Corey Daniels from North Star here with us today?
I don't see Corey here at all. I'm not sure if Corey is able to make it today.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you again. So those are our committee members. And we're pleased to have our Vermont federal delegation here today with us, Lukas Kauth from Senator Welch's office, Owen Doherty from Becca Balint's office, our U.S. rep, and who else is here today? Ethan Hinch from Senator Sanders' office. Thank you. And also we have Amanda Shafer from Representative Levin's office. People might know that Representative Levin co-chairs the Spent Fuel Solutions Caucus in the House and is a lead sponsor on the Nuclear Waste Administration Act of 2024, which was introduced last September, but which is expected to see some activity this year. And Amanda's going to begin by giving us a little rundown of that bill, the status of that bill, and what she expects from from Representative Levin's office. And then we will turn, she's going to talk for about 10 to 15 minutes about her activities. And just want to point out that Representative Levin does represent a district that contains the San Onofre ISFSI, a decommissioning reactor that is literally right at the shore of the Pacific Ocean. And there's been a great deal of concern and activity about getting those casks moved from that location. So there's a real impetus in terms of your office, I know, to move this issue as one would expect there to be. But we will also hear from our federal delegation after you speak, Amanda. They'll have a short period of comment. Then we'll open it up to questions from the committee members first and then the public at large, or a mix of those, because we usually do end up mixing it up. So yeah, without any further ado, I want to just remind people that we did hear a really good discussion about amending the Federal Nuclear Waste Policy Act 2 years ago, almost to the day, in March of 2023, when we had Jay Silberg and Diane Kern. And those two attorneys are going to be, I believe, arguing again in front of the Supreme Court next week about the licensing of a consolidated interim storage facility and the legality of that licensing by the NRC in the NRC versus Texas case that's coming up. So there's a lot going on this issue, and so I just wanted to point that out and welcome Amanda to take the floor. Thank you so much for being here today. If you could.
Thanks so much for having me and inviting me to speak today. And thanks to the Vermont Congressional delegation as well for welcoming me today. So as Lisa mentioned, my boss represents the San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station, which has been it's in the process of decommissioning right now, but in the interim, the nuclear waste that was generated at the site is literally sitting like right on the Pacific Ocean, right on a fault line, right on a military base, and in the middle of some major population centers. So for my boss and for our community, it's really a top priority to have a solution for where this nuclear waste can go. So my boss has been really pushing the dialogue on Capitol Hill through the formation of the bipartisan Spent Nuclear Fuel Solutions Caucus, which if the Vermont folks here aren't, well, I guess Rep. Balint, you are a member of the caucus, so thank you. And it's not not bicameral yet, but if the Vermont senators are interested, I'm sure we can figure out a way to loop you guys in as well. But my boss has really been driving the conversation. We're actually hosting our first event on Wednesday this week for the caucus, which we co-chair with Representative Fleischman from Tennessee, who's also impacted by spent nuclear fuels issues. So we're really hoping to drive the dialogue this Congress on this issue. But as Lisa also mentioned, last Congress, my boss introduced the Nuclear Waste Administration Act to really put a reset on all of the conversations around nuclear waste that have really been stalemating for a number of years. And we really want to kind of put a reset on it and modernize the process for nuclear waste. And in basing our bill on a number of expert recommendations, including from the Blue Ribbon Commission that was done in the Obama era, as well as a number of academic and industry recommendations in the time since. We have put together the Nuclear Waste Administration Act, which would take the responsibility for managing nuclear waste from the Department of Energy and put it into a new independent, fully funded, insulated from political pressures federal agency. And so the goal here is to really make sure that we have more insulation from the political process for the nuclear waste program, especially because we're going through this period right now where we have a new administration in office that's supposed to be responsible for carrying out this generations long nuclear waste program, and we're not sure where the new admin is really gonna go with it. So we can't have this constant flip-flopping every 4 years and expect to make any progress on this multi-generational problem. So the first thing that this bill would do is establish that new administration to handle nuclear waste. The second pillar of our bill is to provide for a collaborative, consent-based siting process for nuclear waste facilities, including both a consolidated interim storage program as well as a repository program. So this piece is really important to my boss because we've seen what a lack of consent can do to stalemate progress on any facilities. We've seen that with Yucca Mountain in Nevada. We've seen it in the facilities in Texas and in New Mexico that are the proposed private facilities that are now getting those Supreme Court hearings this year. So we've seen how a lack of consent can really just gum up the process. And so we think that having local and state communities at the table right from the start is really important to actually being able to solve for this problem and find a community that is open to hosting nuclear waste facilities. And I think that that can look like different things for different communities. So we also want to provide for flexibility for the communities to engage with this new administration and figure out what an amenable solution for them to host the facilities would look like. And the good news is the Department of Energy in the Biden administration was doing a lot of good work with their consent-based siting consortia to engage with communities and states all across the country to figure out what consent really looks like and how we can go about achieving it too. So there's a lot of good lessons that the Biden administration has learned that I really hope continue into the new administration as well. So the second pillar is the consent in the collaborative process, which is just key for all of this. And then the third pillar of our bill is to ensure adequate funding for managing nuclear waste. Right now, the program is contingent on annual appropriations, which has been roughly in the $50 million range. But this program, if you really want to find a solution for nuclear waste and have an adequate budget for managing spent nuclear fuel facilities and constructing those facilities, you really need a much more robust budget. But we also have already we've already collected fees from utilities and utility customers for managing nuclear waste. It's called the Nuclear Waste Fund, but we need to figure out a way to unlock those funds. And so what our bill does is taps into the interest on the nuclear waste fund that has been generating for years and years, and grants immediate access to the new administration to be able to use those funds. And it's a pretty significant amount of money. It's about $1.7 billion per year that gets accumulated. And so we think that that would be a great way for the administration to kickstart their efforts. So we really want to make sure then that this administration can have reliable funding going forward too. And so we do transfer the additional funds from the Nuclear Waste Fund into this new fund that we create in order to provide for that immediate access as well. So reliable funding is just really important because the longer that we go without addressing nuclear waste, the greater the amount of liabilities that the federal government racks up. So I wish I was at my desk. I have this great printout of the comparison between the annual appropriations and the amount of liabilities that the federal government has for failure to take title to the waste, like we were supposed to in 1998. So since then, the utility companies have been suing the federal government every single year, and the federal government has to pay the utility companies since we failed to take title to the waste. And that number has grown to about $50 billion. And so since 1998, we've been paying out just so much money to the utilities. And this funding is paid without any consideration for the budgetary impacts and without any consideration on the appropriation side either. It's legally obligated that the federal government pay this. And that amount of $50 billion compared to the annual appropriations, which has stayed flat at about $50 million, plus or minus a couple million through the years, it is just pales in comparison to what we really need to be solving this problem and stopping the $50 billion that we're paying out to the utilities. So this is a really key part of the bill for my boss as well. But yeah, so just to recap, the three pillars are to establish this independent administration for political insulation and to actually execute, develop a multi-year, multi-generational plan and execute on it. Make sure that you're building public trust with local host communities through a consent-based collaborative process, and then making sure that we have reliable federal funding for this program to continue on. So that's a little bit about the bill. I'm happy to take any questions or Lisa, anything else that would be helpful to add. But this bill is also bipartisan. We introduced it with Congressman Pfluger from Texas. And then we also have co-sponsors of Rep. Peters from California and Rep. Nunn from Iowa. And we're going to be working towards a reintroduction this year as well. So this is definitely a top priority for my boss to be able to make progress on this year. And if this is of interest to folks up in Vermont, happy to engage with you all further and take any questions.
Thank you so much. You mentioned that you're going to reintroduce the bill. What's your time frame on that?
Hopefully later this year. Quite transparently, the Republicans in Congress right now are really focused on reconciliation as the main thing that they're putting a lot of staff time and resources towards. So we're kind of thinking about this as a post-reconciliation priority.
I see. And you mentioned activity, the Spent Fuel Solutions Caucus's first event would be next week. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that event is?
Yeah, so this week we're hosting the kickoff event for the caucus. We're going to have Paul Murray from the Department of Energy, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary in charge of this whole program. So he's going to be coming to speak a little bit about the department's activities thus far and plans for the next couple of years. We have Dan Stetson from the San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station Community Engagement Panel, and he's going to be coming to talk a little bit about the community perspective about why this is really important for local communities who are currently hosting nuclear waste in not really long-term solutions, like similar as in Vermont as well. So we really want to make sure that that community perspective is represented. And we also have NEI, the Nuclear Energy Institute, coming to talk a little bit from the industry perspective. And then we also have ClearPath coming, which is a company or think tank that does a lot on nuclear energy. So we've got a wide array of folks because really there is a wide array of stakeholders. And we want to make sure that a lot of folks are represented when it comes to this. So we're going to have that panel, and then we'll have opportunities for members and attendees to ask questions after that as well.
So that's a caucus event. It's not a formal hearing.
Correct. Yeah.
And are members of the public allowed to
Yes.
come?
It's going to be in DC. I'm happy to send over more information as well in case anyone is interested in coming. But it's going to be this Wednesday.
This Wednesday, this week?
Yes.
Okay. And will that be recorded at all, or
I do not believe so. Yeah, it's just going to be like not recorded, but if anyone's interested in attending live, I'm happy to send over more information.
Does anybody else have any immediate questions for Amanda, or do we prefer to hear from some of the other members of our federal delegation before we open it up? Does anybody have any immediate questions right now?
Lisa, can I ask a quick question?
I have two.
First Marvin and then Skylar,
Thank
quick
you.
questions, because we don't have our delegation for the whole time of our meeting, so I want to make sure that we keep it moving so we have plenty of time for discussion.
Well,
go ahead, Marvin.
There are two impediments that I see. One is the court has stopped the funding for this nuclear waste fund. Is the bill going to do anything about that? And secondly, is the Nuclear Waste Policy Act does not allow temporary storage of nuclear waste. And is anything going to be done about that? Are you going to revisit the Nuclear Waste Policy Act?
Yeah, thanks for the questions. For the first one about the Nuclear Waste Fund, you are correct. The utilities haven't been paying into the fund for a number of years now, which is why the liabilities exist, because the utilities sued the federal government for failure to pick up the waste. And then as a result of those court cases, we stopped collecting the fee from the utilities and instead now paid them. Since they're storing the waste right now. So just because the fees have stopped, though, that doesn't mean that the interest hasn't been growing on the fees that have already been paid into the fund. So our bill would grant immediate access to the interest that has accrued on the entire nuclear waste fund. So that is about the $1.7 billion a year. That's how we go about that. And then the authorities within the Nuclear Waste Policy Act that are granted to the Secretary of Energy get transferred to the new administrator of the Nuclear Waste Administration. And so they would have the ability to restart the fee if they see necessary. And then to the second question about the ability to do consolidated interim storage. So our bill explicitly gives the new administrator the ability to do CIS, consolidated interim storage. And so it kind of overrules that requirement within the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. Because it is explicitly like starting a new program for CIS, including the siting of a CIS facility and the operation of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really core to communities like the one that my boss represents, and I'm sure up in Vermont as well, that there's somewhere for the waste to be able to go and be able to be stored until there is a repository that is ultimately available. We also think it important, though, that a CIS host community has assurances that they're not going to become a de facto repository. And so we do also include language in the bill to make sure that the repository citing process is moving on a parallel path as the CIS facility as well, so that those host communities have those assurances.
Can I just jump in before Skylar and ask, is the access to the interest is one thing, but the access to the current 45 billion, which I last saw DOE reporting, would that be contingent on would that be used for the permanent disposal as currently required by the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, or could that also be used for a consolidated interim storage facility?
Yeah, it would be able to be used for both. The fund, the nuclear waste fund gets transferred, like that money gets transferred into the new fund that we're creating for the explicit purposes laid out in our bill, which would include CIS.
I see. And do you anticipate any alteration of the language of your bill this year before you reintroduce it? Is there time for people to have some interaction with your office regarding the specifics, or do you consider it done?
Yeah, if there are thoughts that people have, I'm happy to take a look at those and talk to Representative Pfluger. Since we do have him as our co-lead, any changes will have to be in agreement between the two offices. But this is something that we really want to make progress on. And as part of that, we think it important that all stakeholders be at the table and be able to provide input. So we want to make it a collaborative process. So if folks have thoughts, happy to get connected with them and have that discussion. Or you can also reach out to the Vermont delegation as well, and
Sure.
happy to also talk to the Vermont delegation too.
So the purpose of this meeting on Wednesday, is part of that to give feedback to your current legislative push, or is it just a issue rate? I mean, what the purpose of the meeting is not to go over details of that legislation at all, or?
I'm sure my boss will bring it up just since it's his like priority within this space.
Mhm.
But it's going to be more general in educating folks, because there's a lot of education that I think needs to be done on the Hill, because it's not an issue that has really been legislated on in a number of years. So a lot of what we try to do in the caucus is to bring folks together to learn and discuss solutions for spent nuclear fuel.
I see. Skylar?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Amanda. Just a couple of things. Can you share any thinking that's been entertained behind the removal of the requirement of licensing a permanent repository? That seemed a very pointed and critical requirement in the Waste Policy Act, and on what basis is that being removed?
So we do still have a repository as part of the integrated like waste management plan. So that is also still a key part of our bill, because CIS is not meant to be a permanent repository. So we do have language explicitly directing the administrator to move ahead with citing repositories as well, but doing so in a consent-based fashion.
Okay.
Okay, I just point out again that the Waste Repository Act requires the licensing of a permanent repository before any interim storage can even be considered.
Yeah, so that's why we have like our bill that doesn't transfer over in our bill, because we're creating like a new CIS program as opposed to monitored retrievable storage, which is in the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. So CIS, it's kind of a quirk, I would say, but it's a different sort of program. So is instead of having the like requirement for like a repository to be operational and everything before CIS, we since CIS is intended to serve as an interim storage place before a repository comes into place. Instead, we have the language directing that the two are moving in parallel. Because we think it important for CIS to be able to move ahead, while also keeping an eye on the fact that we do need a repository. Like 100% we need a repository. And so we want to make sure that the administrator is moving ahead with both. So CIS doesn't become de facto.
Has it been considered that the interim storage may not be a great idea? That the waste should actually be hardened on site, not have to be moved twice, this huge multi-billion transportation project, rather hardening on site, proceed full speed ahead with the permanent repository and skip the danger of moving it twice. Is that even in the discussion?
Yeah, it's definitely been raised for communities like ours where the nuclear waste poses an immediate danger. We think that CIS is really important.
Mm.
Are there qualifications made for those sites which are in a more immediate danger than, I mean, I know there is a schedule of removal. Well, anyway.
Yeah, no, that's also a good question. So the Nuclear Waste Administration Act also has language directing the administrator to prioritize removing spent fuel from all shutdown reactor sites. And then within the shutdown reactor sites, prioritize the ones that pose the highest risk to public safety and national security. So
Okay, thank you. And then just one quick question. I've been to the Spent Nuclear Fuel Solutions Caucus website, and the last entry was the first entry, I believe, the announcement of the bill by Representative Levin. Is there any update coming after 3 years?
Well, this Wednesday's meeting.
yeah, quite honestly, we have not been good about updating the website, but we do try to host quarterly meetings for the Spent Nuclear Fuel Solutions Caucus. So we just haven't really updated the website, unfortunately. So sorry about that.
So will there be ways to follow the work of the caucus?
My boss tends to post on social media after the meetings. So that's probably the best way.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Tony has his hand up.
Yeah, just two very quick questions. First of all, I know Amanda, you had made mention, and I have blanked on the name now, of a co-sponsor of this bill from Texas. I just wanted a repeat of the representative's name, and also whether his district included Andrews County, Texas, which is where the WCS waste disposal facility is. And then the second quick question is, as far as the timeline for establishing centralized interim storage, if that proceeds further, and then permanent storage, would there be any update to the timeline on that? Because I know last year, Assistant Secretary Murray was pointing towards a timeline with interim storage in the late 2030s, but permanent storage probably not until like the 2080s, which was rather depressing, actually, to hear that it would take that long. So I'd like to hear more on that, if you have more on that.
Yeah, to your first question, the co-lead on the bill is Representative Pfluger from Texas. And he doesn't represent the Andrews County site specifically. It's in Arrington's district. I think he represented it though before redistricting. And then since Representative Pfluger is on Energy and Commerce, this is an issue that is interesting to him as just part of the broader conversation on advanced nuclear reactors. Just because we need to make sure that we have a solution to the back end of the fuel cycle if we're going to be doing any new nuclear.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
with regards to the timeline, so I would point you to the Department of Energy, since they're the ones executing on the program right now. I know one thing that my boss is really wanting from the Department of Energy is like a total system plan, laying out like the timelines for things, how much things are going to cost, any other like legislative issues that need to be addressed. So this is something that we're actively pushing for, but I'd say probably what you've heard from Representative Murray is the most up to date, since they're the ones doing the work right now. Of course, my boss hopes that things can definitely move faster though. And honestly, like by moving it into a new administration that is more insulated and has reliable funding year after year, hopefully that can actually speed up the process as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, while we have Amanda here, I'd like to hear from other members of our Vermont federal delegation, and I'd like to start with Ethan, if it's okay with you, Ethan. And I'd encourage you to give any feedback maybe to Amanda that you know, or any questions, but also, you know, let us know if there's anything that Senator Sanders is particularly interested in regarding this legislation or this issue at large.
Yeah, well, thank you all for having me. And Amanda, thank you for taking the time to join us today and speak to us about your boss's bill. Very interested to hear. It's been interesting to hear about the details of the policy, and I'll definitely be interested to hear more about it going forward. I want to take some time to provide a more general update on nuclear issues, one that happened last Congress, and a couple of things that my boss will be looking at going forward. And I want to emphasize something Amanda touched on at the end with this administration. And, you know, things are very uncertain right now. It's very hard to predict what the Trump administration and the Department of Energy will do over the next month, 6 months, year, 4 years. You know, I think they've shown pretty clearly that they don't feel a strong need to adhere to the law. So we can talk about current policy, and that's a valuable discussion. But unfortunately, current law, we shouldn't take that as certainty for what the Trump administration will be doing going forward. So I want to caveat everything with that. I want to provide an update on, you know, the Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, who is a big supporter of nuclear energy. During his confirmation hearing, he said it was a priority to expand domestic nuclear energy. He's issued a secretarial order to the Department of Energy to unleash commercial nuclear power and promote the development of advanced nuclear power. During his confirmation hearing, Senator Cortez Masto did ask Chris Wright about the Yucca Mountain Nuclear Waste Facility. He pretty much gave a non-answer. He said that local consent is important to siting nuclear waste, but he really didn't commit one way or the other. I want to touch on something that I mentioned last time I spoke to you folks, which is related to economic assistance for nuclear closure communities. Last Congress, we took up the Advance Act, which is something that I spoke to you all about last year. This is a bill. One of the core parts of this bill would be to require the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to rewrite its mission statement to say that regulation and oversight should not unnecessarily limit the deployment of nuclear energy. Now, this bill originally in the Senate included about $225 million for nuclear waste host communities that were dealing with the economic impacts of nuclear plant closures. It also included tens of millions for nuclear community advisory committees, and included $100 million to clean up contaminated tribal communities, which are dealing with the long-term impacts of uranium mining. Now, unfortunately, all of this funding was ultimately removed from the bill to grease the skids for its passage. And even more ridiculous, the bill was ultimately attached to a completely unrelated bill for firefighter grant funding, to make it more difficult for members of Congress with concerns about the nuclear energy provisions of the bill to vote against it. Now, Senator Sanders did end up opposing this bill because of his concerns with continue to expand nuclear power in this country, and because it's just ridiculous that the funding to address issues like the economic impacts of nuclear closure communities were removed, and that the bill was attached to a completely unrelated firefighter grants bill. To kind of, you know, grease the skids is kind of a inside baseball halls of Congress maneuver to kind of obfuscate the real the ability to vote on the real policy behind the Advance Act. However, at the end of last year, Congress did pass a bill to reauthorize the Economic Development Administration. That included a provision Senator Sanders fought for to authorize funding for $175 million for economic assistance to nuclear host communities and $15 million for community advisory boards. Now, this language in the bill is very general, and the Economic Development Administration is going to be developing the program, and it's very important that Senator Sanders and his colleagues stay on them to ensure they follow congressional intent and implement this program in a way that benefits communities of Vermont, Lake Vernon, economic closure communities. And I also want to be very clear, this is not real money yet. This is just authorized funding, and Congress will need to actually include funding for this program in the next government funding bill, which is very up in the air at the moment. We don't know what that's going to look like. As a reminder, the government shuts down on March 14th. I think there's a lot of desire to avoid a shutdown from both Democrats and Republicans, but we just don't know what that fight is going to look like and whether we're going to be working on a bill that would give us an opportunity to fund this program long term, or whether it'll be a continuing resolution, which is essentially a continuation of current funding and would not provide a real avenue to fund this program.
Mm-hmm.
So I apologize for taking us a little bit off topic of what we were previously talking about, but I did want to make sure I was able to provide those updates for the group.
No, that's
And
good.
happy to take questions or pass it to my colleagues for their updates, whatever you'd like to do.
Let's just hear from your colleagues first to see, and then we can take questions all together before we, start losing Amanda or other folks. So who wants to go next? Lukas, do you want to maybe jump in next, or?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to.
Thank-
First of all, thank you all for having me. And Amanda, thanks for being here and talking to Vermonters. I'm sure you don't do that often being out in California. I'd also just want to say, we've really appreciated Congressman Levin's leadership on this. Senator Markey introduced a companion to Amanda's boss's bill, the Nuclear Office of Public Engagement and Participation Act, which does a lot to improve community engagement activities and public participation at the NRC, which was follow up on a letter that the two of them also sent to the NRC that my boss was supportive of. So we're always keeping an eye out on what Congressman Levin and Senator Markey are scheming up together by way of nuclear policy. I guess I can provide a quick update too about what my boss is working on. And this goes for Ethan as well. I'm sure you all are familiar with our Nuclear Plant Decommissioning Act, which we introduced a couple years ago. We didn't have a version out last Congress, but we've been in the process of revising that text and are looking at introducing that again this year. Just as a refresher, or for those of you who don't know, the bill is focused on the decommissioning process, specifically around community engagement in the post-shutdown decommissioning activity report phase. And then there's a lot of funding towards post-community and closure community economic development. So we have funding lines that support community advisory boards and their activities, immediate appropriations for nuclear closure communities. We also have financial assistance for communities with stranded nuclear waste, like Vernon, so communities that have the waste where there is no long-term or interim storage solution identified. And then something new this year that we've been looking at, to Amanda's point about durable funding and not having to rely on federal appropriations, is having nuclear plant operators and licensees more financially responsible over the long term for storage. So we've been looking at setting up something parallel to nuclear decommissioning trusts that would set aside funding from the licensee to then be used in economic development activities in host communities and surrounding areas. So, we will certainly reach out to you all to solicit more feedback on that as we revisit the text. So expect to hear more from us there. And, we're always happy to talk about. I know it's been a couple of years since the bill was introduced. So if there are any updates too on your end, any policy tweaks that you think would be especially helpful, we're more than happy to listen to that too. So I think that's it on my end, but always available and happy to answer questions on that.
That's great. Thank you for being here today and hearing about the developments with Representative Levin's bill. And next we have Owen Doherty. Owen, I don't know, what's happening with Representative Balint's office, but maybe you just give us a quick
Yeah.
primer.
Yeah, absolutely. Things have been busy in the House, but not particularly on spent nuclear fuel solutions, as you all know, and grateful that Representative Levin has been leading the way on it. As you all know, Congressman Balint is a Brattleboro native that has represented Windham County in the state Senate and now in Congress. So she really understands firsthand the impact these sites have on communities, and of course also the unfair burden that's being placed on often poor communities. So this is a priority, and safety and good management of these sites is very important to her. So she signed on to two letters in the past couple of years in FY24 and FY25, requesting robust funding from DOE for nuclear waste management that ensure further have progress on management and the siting of spent nuclear fuel. And she's also, like mentioned before, a proud member of the bipartisan Spent Nuclear Fuel Solutions Caucus as well. But really, I have to hop off also at 1. So really want to hear from you all what your priorities are, and make sure that we're tailoring our work in Congress with your recommendations as well.
And will you be able to attend this meeting on Wednesday?
I'm based in the Burlington office, so I won't be there, but I think one of my colleagues in DC will.
I hope so. It sounds like an
Yeah.
important meeting. Okay, let's open it up then for people, the members of the public and the committee. If there's questions, we have 15 people on the call right now. So if there's are there any questions for the members, either Amanda or other members of our Vermont federal delegation at this moment? Let me just see if I see any hands raised. One question I had, just to get it rolling, Amanda, while we have you, is, there was recently pink slips sent to all members of the Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board, which was tasked under the Nuclear Waste Policy Act to review all plans regarding nuclear waste policy implementation. I'm wondering what the process for creating a new administration would look like. Who would be responsible for naming commissioners? Does your legislation set out any kinds of guidelines to assure that there would be a full representation of expertise and political sensibilities on such a panel? Or administrate, I see the administrator is referred to in the act, like it sounds like a lot of power in one person. And particularly with this administration right now, the idea of the creation of an agency like this in this milieu is a little concerning. So I'm just like, what are the provisions or guarantees we would have that it would be a truly non-political, if that's even possible, kind of administer?
Yeah, and it's definitely a fair question, especially because of what we're seeing right now. And just it's pretty scary what's happening at all of the agencies. So within our bill, we do have like a Senate confirmation process for the administrator of the Nuclear Waste Administration. And then we do also have some oversight features within the bill as well. Apologies, I don't remember the exact specifics, but there are specifics within there for the qualifications for the folks who would be on the oversight board as well. So yeah, sorry, I don't have the bill in front of me, the exact text, but we do have specifications in there. And like just a word as well on the what's happening at the agencies. Like there is a lot of uncertainty, but to me that just doubles down the fact that we do need more insulation from the political process. And like a lot of what is happening right now, like especially at Department of Energy, for the context of this program, is concerning. And so being able to have more independence to execute on a plan and make sure that it's based in community engagement, I think is really important.
Mhm.
And those are things that I don't think my boss is going to want watered down at all. So, like even in the implementation phase for the bill.
And how is the DOE reacting to this idea of the work going out of DOE and into an independent? Is there, Paul Murray speaking at your event on Wednesday, is your sense that there's support for this within that agency?
Yeah, so I don't want to get ahead of DOE because they don't have any official position statements out on the bill. My understanding, though, is that there's general consensus, especially in the context of this was a recommendation that came out of the Blue Ribbon Commission, that this is a good step forward for the program to be more in a insulated, like independent, single purpose organization.
And does your bill also foresee inclusion of high-level waste, meaning the Defense Department's legacy nuclear weapons development high-level waste, along with the spent fuel from our civilian nuclear reactors?
Our bill focuses more on the civilian nuclear reactors, but I think the general consensus for like at DOE right now is that all of these really should be considered together and kind of a rising tide lifts all boats.
Right. Okay. I can always go on because I've got lots of questions, but I want to make sure that people from our committee particularly are having their questions answered before we lose our congressional representatives here. So I don't see any questions, which I'm kind of hard to believe. Oh, Skylar Gould.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I was wondering if there's anything in the air about uh, uh, resolving the contradiction between private interim storage, which is being obviously sought by interim storage partners and Holtec, and the efforts by DOE to have a consent-based siting at least. That I've never heard that consent-based siting being necessarily applied to these private efforts, which are still up in the air.
Who's that for? That question?
Anybody who has any thoughts about how this contradiction might be being addressed.
Is that a contradiction for your your boss, Amanda? I mean, do you look at the private efforts in a different way, or do you think of them collectively? Does your bill address that?
So our bill is a federal solution for nuclear waste. So we don't like speak one way or the other for the private facilities, like whether to authorize or to not authorize them. So we don't really engage in the question of private interim storage, but my boss believes, and we're seeing right now, like the whole reason the court battle is happening is because these facilities are going into communities that don't have consent from the states and the areas around them for the facilities. And so we think that consent is just of the utmost importance for actually being able to build a facility, because otherwise we see like lengthy court battles and like lengthy political battles as well, like with the case of Yucca, for what happens when there's not consent. So regardless of public or private, we think that consent is really important.
Do you have a sense of, like, once you reintroduce your bill, there will be a hearing immediately following, or, just regarding this idea of how would a new agency be created? It's been discussed forever. So there's a lot of, seems like there's a lot of support for that. But do you have a sense about how it would progress in terms of, I know it's really hard, but I'm just wondering, if you announced your bill in September, would you expect that there would be public hearings the following spring, or, how would that roll out?
I mean, we'd hope that would be the case. Unfortunately, though, since Democrats don't have the gavels, the Republicans are the ones who gets to choose what bills come up for hearings. So we'll be working with Representative Pfluger to try to make this a priority for the Energy and Commerce Republicans, but ultimately it is up to them on if the bill gets a hearing or any bill gets a hearing in this space.
I see. I see.
I do think though that like based on conversations that I have had, there is a desire to move in a bipartisan fashion between the Democrats and Republicans for a solution on nuclear waste. So I think there is that broad acknowledgement that this isn't something that either party can just charge ahead with, and it's going to have to be something that folks all come to the table to work on. And that's something that my boss and I are trying to facilitate with having conversations with a number of folks who are engaged in this from all different perspectives to be able to have a product that people can really be like jazzed about.
Mm-hmm. You know, I noticed in your summary that you said regarding the nuclear waste fund and the idea of funding the new administration with the interest alone without touching the principal, you specify that no fees would be paid into the new working capital fund, which would be controlled by this new administration. No new fees would be paid in after December 31st, 2027, unless the administrator is operating a nuclear waste facility by that date, which of course it would not be. I'm just wondering where that came from, because it's been a concern of mine that for 10 years now, we have not been collecting for the generation of all the waste that has been generated. We have not been collecting on that fund. And the DOE had estimated probably at least 100 billion, which was a shot in the dark for a comprehensive national solution to the nuclear waste problem. Why is that provision there?
Yeah, so that is actually a typo fully on me within the one pager, but the year is actually 2037, not 2027. And so that tracks a little bit closer to the projections of when a CIS facility would be open. So the hope is kind of twofold, that one, it really provides like the administration like a push to move faster on a facility and really work in a collaborative fashion to make that happen. And then the other one is an acknowledgement that utility customers, because really those dollars, like they come out of electric utility rates that we all pay. The hope is that we wouldn't continue to charge customers for a program that isn't yet promising any dividends. And so that's kind of what we ended up in the situation now, with the utilities having to sue every year. So the hope is to kind of provide a stick for the administration to move in a timely manner, and then also allow for the administrator to collect fees up until that point. And we want to make sure that it's based on performance and we're not just charging folks and don't end up in a situation like what we've been in for the past couple of years too.
Well, that was the ruling, right? Without a program, you shouldn't be collecting. However, there's a fee, you know, it's still, the waste is still being created. So at one point there will need to be a program.
Yeah.
The other thing, just on your summary that I had read, you know, you make the statement that continued storage on site poses a high risk to national security or public safety. Now that is kind of at odds with what the NRC has said, which is that the way the high level, or rather the spent fuel is being stored now, for instance, at Vermont Yankee, is actually very secure and robust and could go on forever until we have a permanent disposal option. Obviously, that's not the case at San Onofre. I would agree with you. But is there a way, or had you considered that idea of, yes, waste that is, or let me put it this way. Are there other sites besides San Onofre that, you know, have joined your bill, for instance, potentially, where the waste is not as safe as the NRC has said, or the people in the community don't think it's safe? I think it's fair to say that in our community, or I'll speak for myself, I won't speak for our community, but fairly confident that the casks are safe where they are now, even though they're next to a river. They seem safe. But are there other communities that, for instance, would maybe avail themselves of a consolidated interim storage because the casks are not secure, while others could remain in place until there was a place for them to go? Has that been considered? Are there other communities?
Yeah, so my boss, independent of the Nuclear Waste Administration Act, also has the Spent Fuel Prioritization Act, which more explicitly has the policy that we're trying to get at within the Nuclear Waste Administration Act, where the areas where continued storage poses the highest risk would be prioritized first. But importantly, it also prioritizes all shutdown nuclear reactor sites, so that communities like are able to have waste removed if that is of the interest of the communities. So I know in New York, I believe it's Indian Point, is another one of those really high risk areas due to its proximity to New York City and such a large population center there. There's other ones like near Chicago. I'm forgetting the name of the shutdown plant, but it's north of the city, right on Lake Michigan, and close proximity to Chicago, which is very high population. So there are definitely other sites that are at a high risk. And we within the Spent Fuel Prioritization Act, it would be like through consultation with other departments. So like for national security, like making sure that you're consulting with the Department of Defense to really determine those like highest risk national security places. And I think Songs is probably pretty unique in that like it is on a military base. So that is definitely an area of concern. But there are other sites where the local community is potentially at risk. And then I would also point out there's a Government Accountability Office or GAO report about climate change not being adequately considered by the NRC. So that's also another resource that may be interesting to consult as well.
Marvin Resnikoff, I'm just going to go run and get my charger because my computer's going to run out. So Marvin, go ahead.
I wanted to follow up. Oops, let me get my speaker down here. I wanted to follow up Liz's question to ask you specifically about San Onofre. I've been there and I've been at hearings there. Has this bill that you're looking at just focused on interim storage somewhere else, or can there be solutions like at San Onofre where you actually move the fuel across the railroad tracks to the other side away from the water? Does the bill consider other alternatives like that?
Not explicitly, because we're more focused on developing a federal program as opposed to like a site-by-site analysis of like what may be best for the site. So when it comes to San Onofre and moving the fuel from one place to another, that would be a decision of Edison, as the Southern California Edison is operating the facility. So that's something that would be up to them and not necessarily federal policy at this point.
Does that answer your question, Marvin?
Yes.
Okay. Skylar Gould.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I'm not even sure if this is appropriate, but I'm looking at a outline of the this is the HR 9786 that we're talking about, correct? The Waste
yeah.
Administration Act.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, does it address this bailiwick? Is that the transportation of a whole variety of storage systems that are currently in place with not a single not a single avenue for addressing a single cask that's damaged in transport or is the salt air on San Onofre if one of these tanks, the integrity of one of these tanks is compromised. Are these issues larger issues of transport and ongoing long-term storage? Are they being addressed at all in this bill?
Yeah, we do have a section on transportation within the bill. And I would also point you to the Department of Energy's Atlas Rail Car, which is a purpose-developed rail car specifically for the safe transportation of nuclear waste. So there is a pretty robust partnership between DOT and DOE, FRA, in order to really make sure that the waste is getting transported in a safe manner. So definitely an important piece of this as well. We would hate for any issues. And I know the Department of Energy is really excited about the Atlas rail car and is doing like public showings, like they had one in Denver a couple months back. So it's definitely a pretty exciting development in the course of nuclear waste. And I know it's at 1 o'clock now. I'm gonna have to jump unless there's any other questions for me specifically. I'm also happy to connect with folks after the fact as well.
Yeah, this may be a quick question. I trust. As Lisa mentioned, there was an off-the-cuff remark by DOA representative who attended this committee that the waste fund is shy by 100%, or if it has $50 billion in it now, it needs at least $100 billion, and and it's only increasing with no fees being collected. How is that? Is that difference just going to be coming out of the Treasury, or is there some way of clawing back costs from the producers of the waste?
Yeah, I mean, with the fee, that would be a way to continue to grow it, to grow the nuclear waste fund. But there's also the interest that has been accumulating and will continue to accumulate as well. So it's definitely something that we're cognizant of, and I think is one of the pieces that is really important to make sure that there's a good line of communication between like this future nuclear waste administration and Congress to make sure that there is adequate funding, because it does also allow for like supplemental appropriations to go towards the new administration. So definitely something that we're cognizant of. We want to make sure that funding needs are met.
And I just,
Thank you.
did you raise your hand, Maddie? I just thought, oh, okay. Is it, you've got this bill, but is it possible that the new Secretary of Energy could just say, we're creating a new nuclear waste administration? Like, do we need a legislative act? I mean, or has it been discussed, or are there any hints that there could be a more, let's call it authoritarian approach to, for someone like the new secretary to say, we've decided within the agency that we're going to spin this function off? Is that a possibility that's been discussed or anticipated or possible?
It hasn't come up in any discussions that I've had, but I think for something like nuclear waste, it's something that Congress ought to really legislate on. That's one of the reasons that we haven't seen progress on the solution in such a long time. There's a lot of specificities that I think would need to be spelled out in statute that the administration wouldn't be able to just do single-handedly. Like, they need authorities from Congress in order to execute on things. So I think it's something that like should continue to be a congressional issue.
And I'll just weigh in on that question too. Everything we've seen from this administration indicates that they are going to be much more looking the other way to reduce government spending, even in cases where programs have clear benefits or there is a clear need for the government to spend more on addressing particular issues. I think it would be extraordinarily unlikely that the administration would take an authoritarian approach to spending more money on issues like this that help communities when they can easily ignore the problem. And yeah, it's a lot more likely they take an authoritarian approach to refuse to spend money appropriated by Congress, as they've already done, than that they would go in the other direction.
I agree, except for that little thing called the $45 billion in a nuclear waste fund.
Maybe.
Anyway, thank you, Amanda. I want, anybody who can stay, please do. I know Amanda had already informed us that she had to leave, I think, Lukas might also have, whoever wants to, needs to leave right now can. Unless there's any objection. Marvin, did you have a last minute question for Amanda?
I wanted to follow up on what Ethan just said. The issue here is when you have nuclear fuel sitting on the site at a decommissioned reactor, you don't have a utility generating electricity and taking so that they can, so that we can go back to them and get money, for the nuclear waste fund. I don't know how that's going to happen. Who's going to put up the money if the utilities are not?
Good question. Anyway, I don't know if you guys have.
What's your answer, Ethan?
It's an excellent question.
Yeah, that's one of the big issues, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to jump, but thank you so much for having me today. I'm happy to keep the conversation going. If anyone has any other questions too. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. And I think if anybody needs your email or wants to get in touch with you, it's readily available on the on your Representative Levin's site. So thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it, and good luck with your event on Wednesday. We'd love to know more about the proceedings. So if there's a way to document it somehow or get feedback on what occurred, we'd love to have that. Thank you.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, Amanda.
I want to take a second to add too. These are very important, serious, complicated questions about what to do with the spent fuel that we've produced from generating nuclear power. It's deeply frustrating to see, to Senator Sanders, to see an administration that wants to quote unquote unleash commercial nuclear power in this country when we don't have answers to these questions, and the administration isn't taking a leading role in providing answers to what to do with the existing nuclear waste. It really, just boggles the mind how short-sighted and senseless it is to push forward, massively push forward in the case of the current Trump administration, nuclear power without coming up with serious solutions to these issues that we're raising. I think that's when Senator Sanders looks at the issue of nuclear power. First and foremost, he sees an administration that really wants to expand nuclear power without answering these questions or providing assistance to communities that are dealing with stranded nuclear waste. And that's a significant issue.
Yes, and also, it just requires a lot more government subsidies, and that again is sort of a contradiction to what they say they want to do is, have private industry really step up, but without government subsidies, none of this really will likely happen. So thoughts from members of the committee or any other questions? Because we gave ourselves till 1:30. It's 1:10 right now. We don't have to use all our time. But, I'm curious what other folks on the committee think we should do. Obviously, a bill like this prompts us to consider our NDCAP's role as a community that has spent fuel. Should we be weighing in on some of these issues? Should we be backing the bill based on what you heard? If we were to, is there a role, I guess, for our local NDCAP in terms of educating and overseeing this decommissioning process? Is there anything that we should be doing? And I'm asking this of members, both of the public and our committee members, to try to advance these issues and having an advisory opinion about the current legislation or the current push or the consent-based citing. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? We've gotten some pressure recently from members of the public. I'm saying we as the NDCAP to do more in terms of educating the public on these matters. That is part of the mission of the NDCAP legislatively in the creation of our group. So I'm just wondering that, Tony too, are there feelings about whether our grouping should be doing something to advance this issue or to support things that we heard today, including a bill that might be introduced by Senator Welch regarding compensation for communities that are already hosting the waste, which we are. Thoughts?
Okay,
I think
well,
I think we should
go
look
ahead.
at the bills. I think that would be a good use of our time.
I would agree.
Okay, I'll certainly throw in. I mean, if if this committee believes that these are items that the full panel should be looking at, I think this is something that at least can be brought up to the panel. The legislation that establishes the panel, I think, is yeah. I don't want to say it's vague. To the way I read it, recognizing that I'm not an attorney, but a lot of the administrative work for both the full panel and this committee fall to me. I think the panel, as currently established, is supposed to focus more on Vermont Yankee rather than national issues. The problem, of course, is there's a point where we do need to look at national issues or learn more about national issues, to have a recommendation for a solution for Vermont Yankee. Just recognize though that this panel does not have any control over what actually occurs at Vermont Yankee. It is information sharing. It can provide feedback to the Vermont Yankee owners, to the state, to whomever. But what we certainly we're not in a position to direct, and this I think partly the reason that this panel, or I'm sorry, this committee was created was to look at some of these national issues a little more in depth, so that at a later date that the full panel could consider. It's like, well, does the full panel need to get involved with this? And if that is the case too, to what extent can the panel get involved in national issues, given its current direction from the legislation that established the panel?
I apologize for interrupting. I need to run. It's been great hearing from you all and being part of the discussion. Look forward to continuing discussion on all the legislation we've discussed.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Ethan, for being here. It was a huge help.
Well, I would say, Tony, we did have an advisory opinion that we formulated regarding, that we posed to the Department of Energy, which reiterated our sense of the panel at large, that there should be that an interim facility should not be pursued before there's progress on actual permanent disposal. I don't have the exact language in front of me. It's all on the website, but that was a policy decision that even with Corey Daniels, we all agreed that we really shouldn't be putting someplace temporarily until there's some progress. I don't know what length of progress. The current law says it must be, I believe, operating, and until there, before there's a temporary store that's pursued. So we already went out there with an opinion that says that, which essentially couples progress on a consolidated interim storage facility with progress on a permanent, which everybody agrees is needed. Even France, where they recycle, is now developing or trying to develop a permanent repository, a geologic repository. So I'm just, and particularly regarding Senator Welch's bills, which could bring ostensibly millions of dollars into our community as compensation to use as we would for hosting this waste. I'm just wondering if there's feelings. I mean, that is directly, if Senator Welch has got a bill that could potentially deliver $20 million to Vernon and however the community is defined for the service that it's providing for having this high-level nuclear waste there, is that something that we should discuss with the larger panel in terms of supporting or not supporting? That's a question for our
Yeah.
committee. And I'm particularly interested in how Maddie feels, or if you need, I don't want to put you on the spot, Maddie. I know you might need more information, but that is, I think, the purpose of our committee is to look at what's happening nationally and how it might impact us at VY, and whether or not we want to throw support or take away support from any of these initiatives.
Well, we discussed the fact that we all preferred having a repository rather than consolidated interim storage. I don't think anybody discussed having an emergency site for having a place to put casks that were under duress and look to be damaged by some environmental consequence. And, as much as I agree, a repository is necessity. I don't totally think that we should rule out consolidated interim storage if there were a need.
Especially for casks like San Onofre, that it's just a completely untenable situation for them there. If you've looked at the pictures, you could just see.
Yeah, they're kind of in a very vulnerable position.
They really are. It's really a shame that the community should have to deal with that. So I get it. But it's different for every community. And if a community like
Well,
ours,
if you had to put support behind something, I think if you wanted to support people's efforts,
yeah,
it would be some emergency siting for casks that were were in a very vulnerable position.
yes,
We are not in that position here.
right.
But if you want to say, we want to contribute, in a positive way, that might be a way that we could contribute. And I think that, the town of Vernon has already said that we don't want, fuel to go someplace where people don't want it. We've
Right.
been very agreeable to consent-based siting.
Yeah, I think most people are really, nobody wants something thrust on them without their consent. But in fact, we are in that position right now. We're charged with the safeguarding of nuclear waste that we didn't think we would be. So we are sort of it's a role that has been placed on us by circumstance without any real planning. And I think we all have confidence that those casks are safe, and that, if they're there for over another 60 to 7,500 years, there might need to be recasking. But at this moment in time, we feel confident. We don't feel threatened by their presence.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely true. We are assured, by our experience with the license holder,
Yes.
that they have every intention of maintaining a high standard of safety for our whole environment here.
But I wonder what would happen if, say, 50 years passed and the situation hasn't changed. And maybe the government decides there's no more money to pay for judgment fund. And
you know what, Lissa? It's going to be my grandchildren that
Yes.
are talking about that.
I know. Well, I think of that. I think of that ahead, you know, like just wondering, like, are we prepared, you know? How would you feel about supporting a bill like Senator Welch's bill that would provide compensation to our communities or offer a financial incentive, which in fact is what they're going to do to try to induce people to step forward for any kind of storage, deep geologic disposal or consolidated. There'll be some kind of sweetener and a financial incentive to do so. Is that something that we should support as a committee?
Well, there again, you know, I think then you'd have to take the temperature is if we were consenting.
Right. So if we would,
We don't want to put it on anybody else, but, you know, do we really want to consent to this? And I don't care. I mean, you can pay people any amount of money, but I think there are some things that money doesn't buy.
right. Skylar?
Yeah, I think Maddie may, the whole idea of giving up the linkage between a permanent repository and interim storage is, really raises my concerns. And I think people who think about it, that's an important issue. And I think what Maddie's is suggesting, and maybe it's a committee advisory opinion or a panel advisory opinion, that, there is waste which clearly needs to be dealt with now. And that could be a separate, that should be where a new legislation might address that in particular, but continue to keep that link between a permanent repository and interim storage at large.
Yes.
And if I could just say to Tony, as I said before, or as Don Hudson at Maine Yankees says, all we talk about is waste. You know, this is this committee's job now. I mean, obviously to receive the information from North Star as they finish up their work, but the future of this panel is national legislation on waste. And it behooves us, North Star is going to be gone in a couple of years. I think it behooves ourselves to really make this the focus of the panel's deliberations and to explore this issue in, any number of avenues it could be explored. But frankly, I'd like to see the panel kind of step up and take a little more active role in what's happening on national policy.
When you say North Star is going to be gone in a couple of years, what does that mean? North Star is there as long as the waste is there, as far as I know.
I'm saying their work is
Unless they sell
basically going to be done.
No, they're the
For this-
licensee. They are responsible forever for the fuel.
I'm saying that decommissioning will be, in the largest measure, will be completed 2 to 4 years. No, I didn't mean to remove them from the picture. I'm just saying that basically the questions that are going to be confronting the panel are going to be around national policy on waste.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's obvious.
But
And that the panel could step up to that responsibility.
North Star is going to continue with its court cases to recover federal money for the management of the ISFC. And we're confident that they'll do a good job with that as long as they have the funds to do so. I guess the question becomes, what if they didn't have the funds to do so, or there was some change, and that's why we're looking at it now, even though it might be something that occurs 20 years in the future. It's possible that a company like North Star, doesn't last forever, and yet the waste is still there. So I think it's like a long-term.
I agree. It's always good to plan for the future, but with the current administration, I'm beginning to wonder if democracy is going to last. And,
There's that.
you can put stopgap measures in place,
Yeah,
but
that's
there's
true.
no guarantee they're going to hold.
It's true. But let me just ask you point blank. Do you think the town, you sit on the town of Vernon governing body, I believe still, planning commission or whatever. If Senator Welch had a bill that would compensate Vernon, Greater Vernon, whatever the geologic lines might be, to the tune of many millions of dollars annually to use as you would for community development while the waste is there, is that something that you would be interested in supporting?
I can't answer that personally. I'd have to put it before the town.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, is your question addressing if you do accept this money, that in some way you're committing to the ownership of, to why
No.
wouldn't you want to have money coming in? Does that somehow change your relationship to the waste?
Well, that's interesting question, but not necessarily. It's just for the job that you're doing while it's there. It's
Right.
not consent.
Right. Well, it is. It's a deal. It is.
I think that money changes everything.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well,
Yeah,
we're
you're
just
right.
about, we have a couple minutes left. Are there any other feelings from members, particularly the committee or the public, about whether, how do we report this meeting now out to the larger panel, I guess and also we should just touch on what our next committee meeting should focus on, based maybe it is about that question of compensation to the community. Maybe we need more information from Senator Welch's office about what he's planning, ideas about the next panel meeting and date. Come on, folks.
Oh.
It would generally
Sorry,
be
I'm just making a note here before I forget it. So
met again 3 months from today, so that would be beginning of March, beginning of April, beginning of May. We would meet again basically the beginning of June. When is our next full panel meeting? It's June, isn't it?
May 12th
May
is the next full panel meeting. It is highly likely that the full panel will have a special meeting with Department of Energy prior
Yeah.
to that date. I spoke, for those of you who do not remember this, Commissioner June Tierney retired at the end of December. Her successor, Carrick Johnson, is coming up to speed on everything in the department, and I met with him last week to discuss NDCAP activities. And one of the things that I brought up was the fact that Department of Energy does want to provide a presentation to the full panel regarding its de-inventory report for Vermont Yankee, which is a general report on what it would take to move the spent fuel from Vermont Yankee at this point to the geometric center of the United States, simply because we do not have a determined end location, be it interim storage, be it permanent storage within the United States. So we can. I'm trying to get logistics moving on that, but we can anticipate hopefully a meeting either towards the end of March or early April that would just cover that report, and then have the regular full panel meeting May 12th that would have presentations from the several state agencies and North Star on Vermont Yankee progress. So that's where we are. As far as where the full is where this committee can meet, I no, that's okay. Yes, I was concerned about a meeting that I know I have coming up in the late May, early June timeframe, but I believe that's actually going to be late May. But yeah, if we want to look at June dates, maybe that's something that we can, as long as we don't discuss anything else, and get into debates again. We can certainly follow up via email to set a date for the next meeting for this committee.
Well, let's set a tentative date just so we have something on the
Yeah.
books. Revisit, say the first Monday in June, whatever that is.
I think I am available that day.
I also want to put out there, the radio, the Rad Waste Conference I went to last year, they're doing it again in the beginning of June in Savannah. I had wanted to attend that again because I found it useful and I think it would be good to go again. But I'm just curious if any other members of the committee would like to go. I mean, I sort of queried people, but it's I could send some information. It's I believe it's the 12th, the 10th through 12th of June or something like that in Savannah, Georgia.
I think those are the dates. I know that's not a national meeting that I attend, but yes, if we're talking the first Monday in June, that would be June 2nd. Okay. And my calendar is free that day. The only conflicts I have in June right now would be June 24th through 26th. But that's a Nuclear Regulatory Commission function. But yeah, June 2nd, or really the bulk of that week, looks like I'm clear right now. If
nobody can come down to Washington for the Spent Fuel Caucus meeting on Wednesday, can they?
Really?
It's the kind of thing that I would do, but I have a big proposal that I've been working on to do that day. I just couldn't do it. So.
Yeah,
I have to leave.
Okay.
Yeah. I wouldn't be able to be down there in person. If they have a webcast, I may be able to join it.
They don't. They're not.
Okay.
Like not.
Okay. I'll follow up with that. If there's a if I find out there's a webcast, I'll make certain people here are aware of it. I'd love to join the webcast, but there's no way I can get down to DC this week.
I know.
So.
Yeah.
So. The June meeting should take place after that conference in June. Shouldn't take place before.
What do you mean? What conference?
The one I think he means the one you're going to.
Oh, I don't know if I'm going yet. I haven't. I have a conference.
There may be information at that conference that would be useful to us, so we should have a meeting after that.
Well, let's just keep the meeting maybe for the June 2nd date, and if I do indeed go to that conference or someone wants to, then we can revisit it. Is that okay, Marvin?
You can meet again.
Doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I just have to say, during the drafting of the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, I'm sure that there must have been a lot of discussion that went into coupling the retrievable monitored storage kind of facility, that making sure that the disposal was underway before that occurred. That must have been a very important point of contention and discussion at that. I would assume, and I, look to Marvin because you've been in this for so long. Do you remember any of that? Like, is there a resource that we can go to other than Jay Silberg? Who's really, Jay Silberg is such an expert and has such a great memory about all of this. Maybe we can ask him, but, I'm just very curious about what the level of discussion and what those points were at that point in history about why they were so adamant about making sure that there would be a permanent disposal before there was an interim.
Okay, I can be helpful on that because I was part of the Sierra Club National Energy Committee, and we had input to our lobbyist in drafting that bill.
Oh, so
Yes,
that's,
but we're not gonna talk about that now.
no, but that would be something, if you have some information, I would urge you to
Yeah.
share that with the committee. Because I think
Sure.
it's important for us to really understand that coupling, decoupling concept as we move forward. So, anyway, we're beyond time now. Thank you
Okay.
everyone for participating.
Can
I
you
think
give me
it's
a
very
second, Lisa? Sorry.
productive. Why don't we go, I'll give you a call, Skylar, or you have my number. Could you call me so that we can let the BCTV people go?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
And again, thank you. Next meeting, June 2nd, unless everybody feels otherwise. Thank you for participating. And as always, thank you, Mr. Lashinsky, for all your help.
Okay. You're
Yeah,
welcome.
thanks, Tony. Take it
Take
easy.
Okay,
care.
thank you. You're welcome, everyone.